What I think I gained most is the thoughtful and very generalizable reflection that you're able to do on practice. And you talked about reflection on practice, and I think you gave us a wonderful example to emulate in our own reflection on practice. I wonder also if you might speak just for a moment to the tension between, that perhaps there's not a tension, but that I see between the substantive expertise and the reflection on practice together. Because as we develop our substantive expertise and we want to know, how to troubleshoot, like increasing response rates for teacher surveys, those skills become increasingly specific and non-generalizable perhaps to other fields. But we need to reflect together, so we're a profession with a lot of generalists and a lot of folks who do deep substantive kinds of work. So how might we think about reflecting on practice together with the notion that this substantive expertise is so important for us improving as a field?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know if I have a total answer. I don't see it quite as you see it. I guess having the substantive expertise and kind of being able to drill down and understand helps me to do things quicker, helps me to see things in different ways. But when I go to other fields and I work with people in other areas, it may not be the same, but there are some general kinds of patterns. So if you talk with other people and it's another kind of program and they're serving a different kind of beneficiary, they may be very different than homeless people, but there may be some. What I try to do when I go down to the specific is also try to rise up to say, what is this talking about in terms of principles? The cupcake intervention that I talk about doesn't just have to be with shelters. You can do it in schools. It's how do you appreciate the people that are working with you? How do you appreciate these other efforts? How do you gain cooperation? Most of what we do as evaluation is giving people a voice. Homeless people have less voice than others, but there are people that don't have voices in other areas. So I think that that's a way to sort of bring folks together, is talk about those areas in terms of areas of principles, context kinds of things. There may be things that happen in homelessness that have specific context, but they relate to other areas. By the way, I had an example from Gary that I wasn't able to, I didn't put in my talk that I want to talk about because it has to do with practice. So I'm going to put on the spot. Years ago when Gary and I were working together, and I think I was more of a methodologist then than maybe an evaluator, and we were doing a study, if you remember, on I think it's burglars. It was nonviolent offenders. And I did this very statistical study. And it was looking at whether or not it was an implementation study and what these people were more like those that were incarcerated, which would mean that the state was saving money, or if they were more like people that were put on probation. But the study didn't come down to one number. There were two numbers. And Gary kept saying, you got to pick one. I was like, I can't pick one. They're both important. He goes, we have the legislature, we have them a very specific period of time. We got to pick one number to give them, because there were two different numbers of how people could be classified. And it really was a process of saying, how do we want to get used? Both numbers were important. Both numbers were part of it. One number alone was not necessarily wrong, but if we didn't give them one, they wouldn't hear anything. So I learned something very valuable in that apprenticeship. Hi.
Hi, Deborah. My name is Rebecca Swan-Jackson. I'm from Montclair State University, the Center for Research and Evaluation. I just had a question because I thought that your presentation was very timely in what we're doing at our center, and that's developing a program evaluation certificate. So the 4-core certificate includes a class in theory-driven evaluation, intro to program evaluation, a class on methods, but we also are in the midst of figuring out how to, we're planning a course for the summer that it's an applied field experience, which I think aligns with what you were saying about apprenticeships. So I just wanted to find out more from you about what you see as necessary skills that an apprenticeship could offer.
Well, I think it's this reflection part in part. I think, there isn't evaluation I haven't done where something comes up that I hadn't anticipated, even though I think I can anticipate a lot. It happens all the time. I have staff come to me, this person that was set up for the study, this case, they don't seem to fit the eligibility criteria. And we go through a set of decision making. What happens if they don't come in? What happens if they do? What level of bias does it introduce one way or the other? constantly. When we're in the field and we're collecting, I have interviewers out there and I get calls about whether or not this case is a reportable case for child abuse. We go through the issue, what would happen this way, there's a constant set of decisions. And I think the best thing you can do is make those explicit, bring them up, and how are we making those decisions? Because that's what I think an apprenticeship can give you. And I've learned from some of the best, and we were constantly making those kinds of decisions.
Okay, that's really helpful. I think one of the things that we're thinking is that we may involve course participants in the evaluation work that we're doing currently, and maybe we'll have some specific cases that may have happened in the past that we could bring them in on those decision-making processes.
I think real situations are always good, even if they're small kinds of evaluating. I've done that in classes I've taught for GW in the past, and we've done actual evaluations as part of the class, and I think those are invaluable, the real experiences. My very first experience in evaluation with Terry Hedrick years ago, where she was doing it, and then she came to Brookings and left me to go to present the results, and I'll never forget going there and telling the guy, well, there was no difference between the two groups, and he goes, yeah, I wouldn't expect it. I just did all this study. I went through microfiches because at those days you had to go through files, and there's no difference. Well, who we randomized, there were two groups. That one was the treatment group that got family counseling. The others were kids who came in and mail-in referrals, and they sent them to family counseling. Because at that time we didn't pay attention to the comparison group. Can I tell you, I've never made that mistake again. I pay attention to my comparison group. So I learned from that experience. No one could have taught me that except that experience.
Hi, I'm Rachel Lawrence from UMass Amherst, and I want to first thank you for a really interesting and I think just very there was a lot of meat to your talk today, and I wanted to thank you for all of it. But I'm more interested in hearing a little bit about your thoughts on how we more rapidly or effectively socialize new evaluators into from a technical orientation to making broader considerations and to a broader orientation in their practice. Specifically as somebody who teaches in higher education, and we often have students for a limited period of time. What are some of your ideas for doing this? Thanks.
So in a classroom situation, if they can't go out and do some of the stuff, I think cases work a lot. I think going through real-world cases. I also, the illustration I just had there, learning from mistakes, I think is almost better than learning from successes. What could go wrong in this instance? What does that mean? Also giving people confidence that they are going to make mistakes at times, and what does that mean? But I think the biggest issue I've seen when people go out is going by the book. You can't go by the book in evaluation. You learn from that. You're guided by principles, but going by the book will almost always get you in trouble. So you've got to have that level of confidence. So going through cases and understanding where those forks in the road are and having really understanding. I was trained as an experimentalist. I think about rival hypotheses all the time in what I do. Even if it's a qualitative, I think about what else could explain this. If I can't control it, I try to explain it. I collect more data. I also try to maximize my learning. I've had many evaluations that have failed in terms of not finding the effects that were there, but I always try to build in something else that I can give to people. You're spending a lot of money, sometimes in an area where the money's not going to come again. What can I do to make a difference there? And sometimes it's in a small way, and more often than not, it's the descriptive data I'm finding. It's something else. I said, wow, we learned something. So.
Thanks, Deb, for a great talk and excellent conversation. I just want to, in addition to thanking you for, I think, doing a great job in meeting what Eleanor talked about in terms of this increasing conversation between theory and practice, just to point out that in thinking about how to look at this intersection, we probably also need to think about the potential dysfunctions and the challenges which can go in either direction. So somebody who's not multilingual with respect to evaluation theory, but becomes a kind of acolyte of a particular evaluation theory, that becomes the book. And so you can have that kind of blinders or blinkers, if you will. And then in the other direction, Ernie House years ago talked about sort of the role of evaluation theorists and sometimes being poo-hooed about dealing with infeasible from the perspective of practitioners who have to be going about doing the work. And I think his contributions are a nice example of a place where evaluation practice didn't think it had a problem with respect to the value bases underlying evaluation. And he helped sort of remind us and eventually convince us that we did, and I think it's changed a lot of evaluation practice. So just to a sort of a footnote that this can be a messy, tumultuous, and imperfect relationship, and we should be happy about that.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. You know, I guess I'm a glass half full kind of gal. So I always look at what I can get out of it. I don't get dictated by it. And I have to say, in looking, now that I've been in a number of different venues of working, I think I really see a difference, though, when people don't even try. You don't have to have the perfect relationship, but there's sometimes not even a dating between the two, between theory and practice. And I think that can get you in trouble as an evaluator if you don't have some of that to hang on, if you don't have some of those principles, if you don't have some of that. Each evaluation becomes a one-off, and you get dictated by the federal sponsors. There are times when I have not done and as much as I've said, I would still do it where I am now, but where, you know, an assistant secretary of a department I won't name, came up to me and said, well, I know how you describe that evaluation, but you're going to do it in a different way. We really want you to use these sources. Do we have a deal? And he was 6'5" and stood over me like this and put his hand out. And I put my hand behind my back. And I said, no, I can't do an evaluation like that. He kept, bugging me. And then finally I said, no, but I look at theory helps me and colleagues help me. So the guidelines help me and colleagues. I always, when I'm doing evaluations, think of people. I was a big supporter and really sort of helped get the Thought Leaders Forum, in part because I wanted to get people to know what I was benefited from when I started evaluation, which is a small association like this where we were able to talk with theorists one-on-one and others, and I have those people on my shoulders when I think about things. I think about, well, what would Ernie say about this? What would Peter Rossi back then, what would all these people say to help guide me in my thinking? And I think that's really important, and if people don't have that, I think they're sometimes rudderless. So, thank you.